No, you got nothing for us here on the State of Football. We're live, chopping it up each and every weekday, 9 a.m. Eastern. RIC in a place to be. Rick Serritella telling it like it is from the NFL Draft Bible recording studios here at the Jersey Shore. Of course, my co-host each and every week, John Murphy, down in New Orleans. Thankfully, so far, fingers crossed, knock on wood, John, you guys are dodging the tropical storms down there, and we'll get a chance to talk some football. I'll kick it off with the Vic Fangio clock mismanagement. Just goes to show you the old adage, when you start coaching not to lose rather than coaching to win, okay, it's a recipe for disaster. And we saw it last night. Vic Fangio, 35 years in the league. Nobody ever told him I better have somebody to manage my clock on the sideline. And it showed last night. It was brutal. And I don't care about his post-game comments saying, hey, obviously the kicker was cold. He missed 3 field goals and extra point. We're going to hold him and hope for the kicker to lose. No, you've got to prepare for that situation. You've got to be ready to call timeout, win the ball game, and get the ball back with a minute and change instead of 13 seconds left, whatever it was. But we'll start off with the Broncos and the Titans. Just a terrible job by Vic Fangio after a great effort with that whole defensive unit there until the very end of the game, keeping them in the mix. But your thoughts and impressions on the Vic Fangio disaster, Denver Broncos getting off to an 0-1 start.
Yeah, 2 years in a row they've kind of had a little bit of magic there with stopping Derrick Henry with a sound front and good tackling. And you could see how good of a football player A.J. Johnson from the University of Tennessee is in the middle of that defense. He really was somebody that stood out, to me yesterday during the game. I think that was a game that the recipe for disaster just happened to fall. It was like, instead of last person who had the ball, last bad decision, lost the game, because they were going tooth and nail back and forth with that hot potato to decide who was going to be the GOAT of that game. And it just turned out to be that it fell on Fangio, because if you had trotted that kicker out there and he missed another kick, that would have been a heck of a way to start the season, there, when Vrabel knows that, there's a lot of times that certain things can be put on other people, or a coach can say, like, hey, it's out of my control or whatever. 100%. This was a Titans, head coach and front office decision to see Gostkowski, to know what he has done, to be from that pipeline, and to bring him in there thinking you had finally solved your kicker situation. And yet, unless Al Del Greco is walking through the door today, you still have a kicking situation.
He's on the golf course.
Yeah, you still have a kicking situation to deal with. Now, maybe that'll be it, right? Like, all of his missed kicks all came in week 1, and now he'll be okay. We saw it happen, last year with Mason Crosby, and he righted the ship. But it was very interesting to see. We mentioned yesterday how the least exciting part of the game has now become the hardest play in professional football. And I think we finished with 19 missed field goals and 5 or 6 missed extra points.
Unbelievable.
And that's incredible. What's more incredible is the replacements for these guys would not then be household names. There's not a lot of guys with experience. So if you're going with somebody else, it's going to be going in a totally opposite direction than they went, with it, because they replaced Greg Joseph, which was a young kicker, but they wanted, a veteran presence there. And you just saw, that it could have gone either way. I think it was a mistake to play it that way and not give yourself an opportunity for either one of those two things to happen. The other thing was that fourth quarter, for a one-score game, there were more less than 60-second drives in the fourth quarter where one team's trying to come back and you think they have to score a touchdown when they're down by, 3 or less, and the other team is up by less than a score, and they're going back and forth with 30 to 60-second drives back and forth. So if you're the Titans, just get out of Dodge with an ugly win and be okay with it. But if you're the Broncos, that's a winnable game. You saw the Chargers win a win or losable game. The Raiders go on the road and get a victory. You already know the Chiefs most weeks are getting a W. To me, that's a tough loss when the rest of the division won games. That's a tough loss at home.
And it was tough for the people out in Vegas too. Brown missing that wide receiver, the fade in the end zone would have made a lot of people happy there at the end. Instead, they settled for the field goal. And hey, according to the broadcast booth, Steve Gostkowski's a Hall of Famer, so he'll be okay. I mean, we saw the kicking has just been atrocious. The Cleveland Browns, I already saw they've parted ways with Austin Seibert. They brought in another kicker for Thursday night's game already. They wasted no time there. Cody Parquet already activated to the 53-man roster.
Amazingly, they added the guy who might have been the originator of all these problems, Mr. Goalpost, Cody Parkey. And if you didn't like one goalpost, he even gave you the double
doink.
Right. And I'm trying to remember, when did this become such an issue? And he might have been the originator of when you started thinking, wow, you can't just kick a field goal and win a game. You can't just make a kick and think it's a kick. You might want to sit there and watch from 40 to 45 have become suspect and question marks. And I think this is one area that you might be looking at it, but and you have to make a kick, but you might be looking at it and saying, is this one of the areas over the weekend that you saw the lack of, the practices being different, the changes a lot of teams made in that area, and not having the snapper, holder, and kicker getting really live reps in preseason games? It's got to be something, because to say 20, I mean.
Well, let me ask you this: is it the stadium being silent? Maybe that's messing with their head.
I mean, but I can't imagine that there's been many weeks, and I'm sure we'll see it somewhere this week. Someone will come out with it. I can't believe that there's been many NFL game weeks with 20 missed kicks. I can't imagine. And it started with the Texans, and it goes all the way to the last, to have it start your season, week one, and be in the last game as well. I mean, that's an extraordinary thing to think that there's that many guys, and it's all kind of guys, right? It's a guy like Gostkowski who's kicked forever, right? And then it's a guy like Novak who's kicked, and then it's two rookies missing, multiple kicks as well for the Colts, there, and even the Bills got out of harm's way with their guy, missing kicks. So I think it's just, there's something to it. It'll be interesting to see, how it is moving forward. But, once again, like I said, when you look at that loss, I think it's one, it's a winnable game. You give them kudos for figuring out how to play very good defense, against them. They held A.J. Brown mostly in check. Corey Davis actually, made a few plays, which is a good sign, for the Titans in the big picture. They got away with one there with the Titans. Luckily, seeming like Taylor Lewan got out of the game without really suffering a major knee injury, because that would have been really harmful for them, considering they're already down Isaiah Wilson with all his issues, to be down two starting, caliber tackles before week one ends would be, a huge issue, for things. So I think you like what you saw there from the Titans. And if you're the Titans, you saw in the game earlier a team that's either going to be battling, to also win their division or be in the hunt for a real wild card spot, are the Pittsburgh Steelers. If they get what they got last night, I guess it is against the Giants. So, that's a little bit measured, for me, especially on the offensive side of the ball for the Giants. The Steelers defense is good. If they play that good, they're going to be a top 5 defense of the past decade, if you're playing to the level that they played like most of the time last night.
Well, let's dive into that game, because our good friend David Turner, shout out to Maverick Sports. I told him I'd be repping the Silky Smooth T-shirt. John, hopefully yours is in the mail. But he called me a hater on Friday's show. I'm just calling it like I see it. all this talk 3 years now of hog mollies. We're going to rebuild the offensive line. And I mean, honestly, John, this is like one of the worst performances I've seen in the last 5 years. 22 quarterback pressures, 22 quarterback pressures. Unbelievable. 11 hits on Danny Dimes, 11 hits. Only 3 sacks, credit to Jones for getting rid of the ball. But God, man, I mean, and props to Andrew Thomas. He's the only one that played halfway decent. This is just terrible, terrible, terrible play. It's Cam Fleming. That's your guy, Cam Fleming. I'm hearing Shane Lemieux, who was inactive, is the answer at center. And again, it's just like turnstiles. Hello. The run game, not any better. I think 15 carries for 6 yards, at least 8 or 10 carries for Saquon Barkley goes negative. You see, once they do get him involved in the passing game and he has a little bit of space to work with, he can actually maximize his touches and the opportunity. But man, oh man, I can't imagine you winning a single game with offensive line play that terrible.
Yeah, and if you're looking for any silver lining, and it's a very slim silver lining, it does appear the one thing that Gettleman for sure has hit on is Daniel Jones.
Really?
It does seem like that he is.
I don't know.
Appearing
I don't
like
know.
he was correct on that, because I would want to say, man, could you imagine how other quarterbacks would have played and handled that type of performance last night?
Eli Manning did it for the past decade.
As a guy that's still, what would last night be? Probably in the teens, right? Probably 14, probably 12, 13, 14 start, in that neighborhood. He's, not played a full season yet. To have no running game, to have literally no offensive line play, to say you're at a certain point in the game, Saquon's at -6 yards, and you're under literally pressure every down and distance, imaginable. To one of those turnovers is just him. Yeah, you should have just eaten it or thrown it out of bounds. But I mean, he's getting smushed on the play that he throws it up, and it's a terrible interception in the end zone. And on top of it, the Steelers have a D tackle, dropping into coverage. To add on top of it. But I think, unfortunately, to me, this turns out to be also a lot of a combination of the personnel's not ready. Jason Garrett, I think is going down with the ship in the sense of this is his offense. This is their style. We saw the Cowboys routinely have good personnel and even an above average O-line that at times looked inferior based on the kind of play calling that they had. I mean, and to me, the only thing that saves the Giants from being the biggest disappointment is, okay, you did me a favor by semi-saving Monday Night Football, and then you had to ruin forever NFL primetime. Because Booger McFarland is the replacement for Tom Jackson. Oh my Lord! I mean,
they're trying to stash Booger wherever they can fit him. I saw him in the college football studio. Then they had him in the NFL studio. Now they're putting him with Berman. Like wherever we can hide Booger.
On behalf of all football fans' ears, I would like to thank Westwood One Radio, because it's the only saving grace that you have for Monday Night Football is that Westwood One Radio exists. It's bad. And the only thing that might rival that is the lack of competency in their ability to find somebody other than Dan Orlovsky to explain to us what we're watching that we need re-explained to us because of the broadcast booth. And now you have to go back to the studio and get more of Dan Orlovsky. Man, if there was a show to do, on the review the day after the games of these broadcasts, man, we want to be quarantined from this action. When Brian Greasy is the standout of the broadcast booth, we might be in trouble.
And I will say, like ESPN, I thought did them a disservice because I know Levy and Greasy worked some college football games, but then they had to inject Louis Riddick into the mix. But I thought they did him a disservice because, Herb Street and Fowler have been together for God knows how long. And you could see the difference, the chemistry. Herb Street and Fowler, I mean, they just were a superior broadcast team, in my opinion. Not that I really enjoyed either one thoroughly, but at least, Herb Street does do his homework. He does bring some insight to the game. Brian Greasy, I'm not sure, aside from building the stadium, giving him credit for the house that Brian Greasy built out there in Denver. It's brutal, almost as brutal. I'm going to go back to the play of Daniel Jones, John, because I don't see it. I'm not sure why people are infatuated with this guy. It's the same thing as when he was at Duke. Pressure folds like a cheap suit. That was my scouting report. And guess what? This is the NFL. You're not going to have more than 2.5, 3 seconds. That pressure is going to be there. It's not going away. And that's why I feel like, they were pounding Eli Manning because he was playing behind just as bad, if not worse, offensive line for the past 5-10 years of his career. And it's amazing to me. I thought, hey, did he lose some miles per hour off the fastball? Absolutely. Did he make some throws sometimes that made you scratch your head? No doubt. But again, it's because he got rid of the ball so quickly. People underestimated the aspect of how quickly Eli Manning learned how to get rid of the ball towards the end of his career. Now, Jones, he came out, he had the bravado. I saw, to start the game, a sense of leadership that I've never seen from Daniel Jones. He had a little chip on his shoulder. He's fired up. He's yelling in teammates' faces. I said, wow, this is a Daniel Jones I never saw. Then he throws the interception when Watt drops back, throws the interception. Boop! All the air out of the balloon, all that pumped up energy just deflated, and it's just the same old story. I get it. He doesn't even have a full season under his belt, but I look in the same building, the other color, Sam Darnold's the same way. People are saying, oh, he's a good quarterback if he just had a team around him. Oh, he's a good quarterback. Is he? I don't see it. I don't see it at all. And Daniel Jones, they get the penalty there, and he comes back and hits Slayton with a big pass. He's wide open for a 40-yard touchdown. Great. Good throw. One good play this guy makes. Give me a break. Daniel Jones is not the answer. Giants fans are going to find out. Giants fans are going to see it. John, I don't know what you and the rest of the country sees in Daniel Jones. All I see is a guy that crumbles under pressure and creates turnovers.
Well, now this week we have the battle of former ACC quarterbacks as the surprising 1-0 Bears will host Daniel Jones and the 0-1 Giants. And if you think it gets any easier,
49ers on deck.
It does not get any easier. So the only person, if you're saying what you're saying, and it turns out to be true, which is quarterback play in New York, other than Ralph Ventry's Buffalo Bills, is not good at the moment at all. The only people that will be less anxious or less excited about this schedule will be anybody who drafted Saquon Barkley in their fantasy draft, because you're not winning if he's got 15 carries for 8 yards. And I'll say this, and again, it's not just to defend Daniel Jones or think that he is going to be an upper echelon guy. If you went into last night's contest against the Steelers with that pass rush and your offensive line, and the game plan was for Daniel Jones to drop back and throw it 40 plus and lead the team in rushing, then we need to do some investigating on the OC, your OC's prowess, just in the sense of, man, I know that the running game didn't get going, and then you got behind, and then you're down 2 scores, at a certain point, and that could dictate the game. But boy, I just don't see it, in that style and that thing. And again, it's two totally different organizations. And I know the Giants, are very well thought of in terms of, over the history of football, not just recent history.
Huh.
The Patriots come out and throw the ball 19 times, hold the ball for 35 minutes, and figure out just when you think they might be dead in the water, they look at the rest of the league and what some of these teams are doing. They find their own dollar store version for the cheap, get Newton in there to run this style that other teams are running, aka the Ravens and a little bit of the Cardinals, that with that running quarterback, and they play good on defense, no turnovers, they limit their play, and you get a suspect offensive line. The Giants are suspect for their reasons on the O-line. The Patriots are suspect for their reason on the O-line, and the Patriots are able to run the ball 42 times, 35 minutes of time of possession. Quarterback manages the game. I mean, I think you got to look at that and just say, did the Giants plan? And again, I'm giving them a little bit of a push that you got down and then you had to throw. Daniel Jones, 45 between rushing 4 attempts and 41 dropbacks, 45 times the ball's in his hands last night. And total Saquon Barkley, I mean, I just don't – I'm not sure you're going to – that's a remedy for failure on a weekly basis. And you mentioned it. It's Chicago, and then it's the 49ers, and then it's right to the emergency room. If you got Daniel Jones doing 40 dropbacks, against those teams, because they know now the secret's out. You're going to try to establish the run next week to try to get Saquon on deck. There will be everyone in the box. Everything's going to be in the box. There's no doubt in my mind that the Bears will be loaded up, and just say, okay, hey, 2 guys in Eddie Jackson, that can pretty much cover what you have at receiver and tight end until you prove me wrong. And so to me, that's a very interesting, situation there, to say, hey, that those are some difficult ways to lose games. And if your best player, gets off to a rocky start, again, it's just the rhythm when you look at it. Boy, there's been some down times, and we've seen a lot of them. It's been a while since both the Jets and Giants are this bad.
It's really bad.
Right now, it's bad.
And they got a bunch of prima donnas on the team. I mean, every week I look up, Sterling Shepard's on the injury report, Golden Tate on the injury report, Evan Ingram always injured. I mean, when does it ever stop? Jeez. I mean, have a little heart, have a little pride, play with some pain. God, I mean, the slightest little nick, and these guys can't play, and the coaching staff tolerates it. And I'll tell you another thing, Cam Fleming is the best option that you have at tackle. I mean, you have no depth. You didn't search the waiver wire. You've got a rookie starting left tackle. It's like we haven't been paying attention the last 3 or 4 years, and we weren't prepared for week 1. We didn't do anything. We didn't do our due diligence. I mean, I can go on and on about it, but to me, that whole roster is a disaster. Aside from Saquon Barkley, there's no talent. The most exciting thing about that team is when Jabril Peppers goes back for a punt return. I mean, seriously. I mean, there are no playmakers, 0 on that roster. Nobody. I mean, Darius Slayton is your biggest weapon.
Yeah, no doubt.
I mean,
Tom Coughlin's 1-0.
Well, hey, I bring me back. Hey, injuries are a mentality. I think, give me that guy back, because it's like it's an infection that's spread around that locker room, and clearly Joe Judge is not the guy that's going to get it turned around. I have 0 confidence in his ability to provide us with the winning football team in New York. Buffalo, do they count? Yeah, sure, I guess so. I'll be honest. I think Josh Allen is on the other. If you said, hey, give me, you split the 32 starting quarterbacks in the league. Well, Josh Allen's in the top 16. Those other 2 guys in New York are in the bottom 16. But Josh Allen, he's a frustrating guy to watch too. And we talked about it before you jumped on yesterday with Ralph. I mean, his decision-making process has to get so much better. If this guy just executed on half the amount of throws that he should be completing, he'd be a superstar.
Well, I think with him quickly with Josh Allen, if I were looking at him just based off of last week and down the stretch, it's to me a lot like right now. You can win a lot of regular season football games, and the way that he goes, the way that he's playing, what will end up happening is you will this year get dumped in the first or second round of the playoffs by a team that you think had a favorable matchup, that you think the Bills, this is a win, in the second round, or, this is a way to get through, to the next round of the playoffs. That style, if he does not correct some of that, if he's running the ball 10 to 15 times in a playoff game, I'm going to vote that the Bills lose a game in the playoffs that they probably shouldn't, or would be a favorite, and then get beat, much like the Ravens against the Titans. That type of scenario, I could see, and I was saying it would be someone like the Colts, that's the type of game that I saw a higher seed losing to a lower seed in a playoff game, because I think he just takes not the easy way out, but for him, it is that easy because he is that athletic and he knows he can just make a play. But I think when you get into better games, when you get into, a one-out scenario against a very good defensive team in the playoffs, if he doesn't correct some of those mistakes and learn to find that second and third read quicker instead of just taking off and running, they're going to get upset in a playoff game, or they won't get upset. They just will not play well on the offensive side of the ball, and they'll give their defense, fits, and the defense will be on the field too long. And either way, it'll turn out with the Bills getting upset earlier in the playoffs. It won't hurt them in the regular season. It will hurt them in good football games. If they do that against the Patriots, if they do that against Kansas City or even the Titans or the Ravens or the Steelers, they'll probably come out on the short end of that. But right now, Josh Allen, I mean, you're right. They're not even in the same ballpark. And the thing is, at least Daniel Jones has a little more time to disprove where he might be at in a lot of people's minds. Man, the Sam Darnold thing it's getting rougher in a hurry when you look at no Bell.
I don't see it. I don't see it.
And now no Le'Veon Bell for the foreseeable future. And the factor that, man, that currently the coaching staff gets a no confidence from me, whereas the GM has it, but it's really going to boil down to who is Joe Douglas going to go with when he gets to make that decision for himself. And on
Eric
the side, for the Giants, it's going to be who is the decision maker if you're sitting there again with a top 5 to 7 pick and you're possibly headed in that direction, because, the Eagles were no great shakes week 1. That's a lot of injury related, I believe, until we see otherwise. The Redskins could be equal or better than we thought, possibly headed toward a 500-ish, type team led by their defense. And if they handle their quarterback correctly and don't let him lose games, they seem like a team that could be a 500-ish team. The Giants could get off to a pretty bad start here, and the Jets are going to be right there with them.
Either one of those teams could have the number 1 pick, and I think that's where it gets interesting, especially, I think Gettleman has a free pass this year with the new head coach. I think he'll be back making that selection. But, God, if he gets the number 1 overall pick, Trevor Lawrence is your answer.
Well, I'll tell you who's going to be right there with him after week 2. It's going to happen right there by Friday morning. The Browns will be 0-2.
Yeah, well, they've started over so many times. I can't even take that team seriously either. It seems like the same teams are the bottom feeders of the league each and every year. And I'll tell you what, Joe Douglas, I mean, again, you cannot insert Greg Williams soon enough. See if he has that magic carpet ride like he had with the Browns a couple years ago. They went 6-2 when he took over. See what you got there. If not, go get Eric Bieniemy. And I'm telling you, Sam Darnold, I've never seen a game where I said, "Oh wow, that was pretty good." He put us on the back, rode us into a win. Great game, Sam. I mean, great quarterbacks lead teams to victory at some point in time. At some point in time, a great quarterback will carry you. Sam Darnold hasn't done it. I haven't seen one throw that says, whoa, like a Josh Allen will roll out to the right, throw a laser opposite hash mark, 40 yards across the field, and you say, whoa. Not too many quarterbacks can do that. I've never seen Sam Darnold pull off a throw where I said, whoa, there's a rare throw that only a few guys can make. I never seen a game where I said, oh, Sam Darnold kept us alive. I mean, how many years are we going on? I never seen it. So, I know Danny Dimes, he had some good games against some really poor teams last year. And, maybe he can keep that trend going alive and the Giants can pick up a W or two. But again, if you're going to allow 22 quarterback pressures, if you're going to allow the opposing team that smashed your quarterback to the ground 11 times, and it's a miracle they only gave up 3 sacks on the stat sheet, you are not going to win a single game in the National Football League. All right. The State of Football, Rick Serritella, John Murphy, breaking it down each and every weekday, 9 a.m. Eastern. John, let's shift gears a little bit. We've been NFL heavy the last day and a half. Let's switch it up to the NCAA. We've been monitoring the Big Ten. We talked about it so much leading up to the season. This revote that we keep hearing about has not yet happened. However, all indications are that conversations have been productive. The new evidence and procedures and testing that have been presented have been well received. Now, we are hearing some conflicting reports. Some people saying that the Big Ten will be all in. Other people are saying even if the Big Ten approves, well then, hey, Michigan State, and Maryland are still going to sit out, which I thought was surprising that Michigan was in that group. Now, I'll roll the Pac-12 into this because theoretically, October 17th would be the start date for the Big Ten. Suddenly now, the Pac-12 is saying, oh, don't forget about us. It looks like they might start up in November. Very interesting to see now where a lot of these bowl games were in question or in doubt because you couldn't have the teams weren't playing. Suddenly now, how will the bowl game schedule look? How will the All-Star game circuit look? Because if you're starting in November, well, heck, when the All-Star game circuit rolls around in January, the Big Ten and Pac-12 may now still be playing. And now the SEC and ACC and Big 12, they might be waiting, a delayed bowl game schedule. There's a lot now that still needs to get worked out. Maybe not as complicated as if it were a spring season, but still a lot of scheduling nightmares ahead.
Yeah, no doubt. And on a third side note, I saw yesterday that Air Force and the service academies were given the green light that even though Air Force won't play their regular schedule, they are being allowed to play against Army and Navy. So they're going to prepare to play Army and Navy, cadets in the stands, all of this great, in terms of, what it sounds like, what it looks like, sounds like a great idea. You get the clearance. All of them are, probably the safest, in terms of everything they're doing on their campuses and, in their situations. But I think the two interesting things is, okay, now if you're Ohio State, we've had guys, and real good guys back out. I don't have my guard and I don't have my cover guy. They've already backed out. You have 2 or 3 teams, and those 2 or 3 teams, let's look at who the team president, look who some of the people that are involved in those universities are more medically and financially driven, but financially driven in the sense of saying there's no way we're putting our university at risk for $100 million dollar lawsuit when somebody comes back down the road with whatever issue, the coffee was too hot. Somebody will come up with something sooner or later. If you go ahead and play, some guy's going to get sick. Some walk on who's got a, double family members as lawyers will come up and figure out a reason, that their kid, had an issue by doing this. And so, if you play and you're the Big Ten, Ohio State is already without their full roster. And these guys aren't going to opt back in because of that. We did see LSU get an opt back in, which was an interesting scenario where one of their starting D tackles yesterday decided to opt, back in, to the equation. Probably after hearing what his true NFL status was, he opted back in, to increase that. But I think the most interesting scenario here. And
what player was that, John? Because I didn't catch
Morrell,
that.
I believe the other D tackle, not the better one, the other one.
Gotcha.
And so, but he adds a huge veteran presence to them, and that's a big deal for them because he still has basically 10 plus days to get ready for Mississippi State, and probably play, week 1 for them. But I think the thing with the Pac-12 that's overlooked is Pac-12 was the conference where the players have said they've made rules and regulations they want in order to play. So now while we're talking all about they found a deal, they've got a COVID test deal so that they can afford it, and that's moving them in a direction. Both conferences are moving in a direction of playing sooner than later because they found out that it's, underlying circumstances are what causes those heart conditions. So if you don't have any, you're probably going to be cleared and okay to play. I've said it already. My belief is major universities have figured out there's no way to do it in the spring, not a real way to do it. Then they're worried about having double athletes around, which is college basketball, college football, and everybody else that'll be around each other. And is there another, explosion of COVID if you try to do that? We don't know if a phase 2 of COVID's coming sooner than later, sometime in the fall. And if right now you can start, at least you can start getting access to that money that if not, you're giving it away. And I think if you're the Big Ten or the Pac-12, no college basketball last year. Both of those conferences, huge basketball conferences. No other sports. Pac-12, and Big Ten are good baseball conferences. Hockey in one of them. A lot of outdoor sports in the Pac-12 that got, destroyed in the spring. And the Pac-12 is a huge women's sports moneymaker. There's a lot of female sports in the Pac-12 that are key to driving those universities' total sports athletic programs. And now you're shut down. USC volleyball team shut down. UCLA swimming, UCLA, in a lot of those sports completely shut down. The revenue model is going to show you that these schools are looking at it saying the coast is a little clearer. There's a little less, opportunity in the spring. We better jump on this bandwagon, have some daily testing, be willing to spend some money to make some money. And you look at last year, I believe the Pac-12 earned $400 to $500 million, and their cost of doing business was $42 to $50 million. So you can do some daily testing in the Pac-12 and still make some money. And that's going to be their bottom line, is that they think their bottom line is now not going to make it to the spring. And if there is no spring, it's certainly not going to make it all the way to next fall with no college basketball and then no college football and waiting till 2021. I think that it's clear that you may not get everybody to play, but they're going to try to play in these two conferences because they're seeing the one thing that they don't want to see. And it's not Alabama or LSU or somebody winning a national championship. It's that right now there's functioning programs that are making money and they're sitting there going in the red
bleeding
and dying for money. And I think if they feel like if we have daily testing, if we do all these protocols, if we have a little bit of a few doctor and experts turn a little bit away from the sky is falling to being more neutral, their lawyers are going to say, you get away with this if somebody gets sick. You don't lose, everything in the kitchen sink on a lawsuit now or in 20 years if you do all these protocols. And like I said, if you're at $450 million on the plus and $40 to $50 million cost, the Pac-12 can spend some money and do some things. And if the Big Ten wants to play, I think they'll play with or without the full load of teams because it's just too much risk. And I really believe that what people have figured out is it's not going to be easy to do anything in the spring at all.
Sure.
And everybody, if you think some guys have opted out, everybody will opt out because the NFL is not changing for the NCAA.
True story. And at the end of the day, Kevin Warren, I think especially looks like he winds up with egg on his face because he did pull the trigger too quickly. We're finding out now that if he would have just wrote it out a little bit and waited to see what happened, they wouldn't be in this predicament. And that's the reality. No matter what you believe or how you feel it, everybody else is doing it. And I thought one thing Brian Greasy did say that was interesting was, Kevin Warren was so obsessed with being out in front, being the first guy. He wanted to get it right. And he was in such a rush to be the forefront. And the fact that he didn't communicate with the other conferences was a poor judgment. It was a bad decision, lack of leadership, a rookie on the job. Here he is, being the end-all, be-all decision maker. Well, hey, why don't you go talk to some of the other conferences? Because guess what? At the time, down south, the Southeast was doing a whole heck of a lot worse shape. And we talked about 5 different schools in the Big Ten had to shut it down. Well, guess what? The Northeast, at least, was really had a good grasp on some things. And, it was just a bad decision by Kevin Warren. And now, he's going to have to be a man, stand up, and take the beat down. I'm not sure how much longer he'll be the commissioner there at the Big Ten. If they want real leadership and somebody with a clear vision, John and myself are available. Hit us up. But I want to kind of just go over to how this impacts the draft, John, because, Shaun Wade's father was leading the protests there at Ohio State. I mean, he was really front and center, Rudy Wade at these, protests outside the Big Ten. And now you saw Shaun Wade said, hey, you know what? I'm tired of waiting in the water. I'm going to the draft. It'll be interesting to see now, especially from a Justin Fields perspective, as more of his teammates continue to opt out and the chances of them winning a national championship become lesser and lesser. He was too at the forefront, like, hey, let us play. Hashtag we want to play. Well, wouldn't it be ironic if he decides to then opt out and pursue an NFL career? Because what I see happening now is, especially with the bowl games, I think they're going to try to do the bowl games because they want to make that money. And I think now you're going to start putting kids in a predicament. Hey, do you want to prepare for the draft, or you want to go play in your bowl game? You want to go play in the Senior Bowl, or you want to go play in the college football playoffs? And I think, organizations like the Senior Bowl, the NFLPA Collegiate Bowl are then going to be in a weird predicament where, hey, we might have a lot of FCS guys because Big Ten, Pac-12, we're still waiting for those guys to finish. I think there's going to be another monkey wrench in this whole draft process. And, the other thing you said that's funny is we were all scared to start back up in the fall or the winter because of the flu season. And now it's like, all right, well, Big Ten and Pac-12 are saying, hey, you know what? Let's go for it in the flu season. And there's so many variables here. So how does it impact the draft process, specifically the combine and the all-star games? I mean, why in the world, would a kid continue to play into January if he has a combine invite?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is we said it. The teams that are playing kind of this hybrid, Central Arkansas, we're going to play a handful of games now because we can, and we're making money doing it, and we're doing it safely. And then we're going to swap over and play our conference schedule because you're allowed to play a maximum number of games between the spring, the fall and the spring. But you're going to see possibly one group of guys playing in the fall and the younger guys playing in the spring. And I think the same thing will happen. Do those bowl games get to opt out for a year? the way that we saw Notre Dame opting into the ACC. Well, as a bowl game, are you going to be able to opt out for a year with your commitment to certain teams only being eligible for your game? Because are you really going to take a club that might have gone 8-3, but now doesn't have their guys? And how are you selling a bowl game? And I'm not saying that this would happen, but if Clemson and Notre Dame were somehow then put in a bowl game together and the two quarterbacks don't play, now what game do you have? You know, there's several opportunities for the teams to have success. And then at the finish line, if it's not for a real national championship, I think you'll then see those guys making their way to say, well, like, hey, it's not in my best interest. Thanks for everything. And I put in my 10, 12 games and I'm going to the draft. You know, and those guys will go to January and head to the NFL. And will the rest of the team decide to play? Will that bowl game want to honor that money? Will the fans still show up for a game that's, you know, suspect, you know, in terms of, you know, that scenario? You mentioned it. You know what, you know, as a Miami minus De'Ara King, you know, in a bowl game, they could go 9-2, you know, they could have a winning season with him and then possibly have a bowl game, and he's going to have a decision to make between going to an all-star game or playing, you know, a bowl game, you know, with his team. And I think that when you're saying, okay, the October start for the Big Ten, they can relatively, without bye weeks and certain things, they can get done in the vicinity of when you would want them to get done. Mm-hmm. If you're talking about end of October or early November, you know, for the Pac-12, well, they're playing till January. You know, you're not getting to a finish line of even a semi, you know, conference, you know, deal, unless you're saying, are you going to just play your division and sort of come up with a pseudo 6 or 8 game, you know, type regular season and not have all the interaction, you know, between the two sides and say like, hey, we'll get to a champion, you know, by playing a Pac-10 finale that between two teams that have never played each other, you know, this year. I mean, maybe you can do a shortened, you know, Pac-12 season to get in line, you know, with everyone else. But that's going to be very interesting, you know, to see like how do you just deal with, you know, with all of those, you know, changing optics, you know, with things here. And also the thing of what I mentioned and what you just said about Justin Fields. It's not going to be just Justin Fields. If you start off and your club starts off with a certain record or whatever, are some of those kids at that point going to say, hey, I gave it my best, you know, like at 0-3, I'm out, you know, at 2-5, you know, I don't really need to go to the, you know, Toys R Us, you know, I don't really need to go to the Gator, whatever, you know, bowl. I really don't need to go to the AT&T class. You know, I don't really need to, you know, so, I mean, these kids have already shown you the propensity to do that.
And you can't blame them. You can't blame them because the schools and the conferences already made it clear we don't have your best interest at the forefront. So why should the players then be loyal to the schools? Right. And I'll throw in the other monkey wrench is, oh, by the way, the FCS will begin starting up play in January, and then their playoffs are going to begin at the end of March and run into April. So it's going to run into the draft season. The FCS will be playing during the pro day circuit. So the FCS schools, it's like, okay, so North Dakota State, we clearly know Trey Lance and the tackle aren't going to be there in the spring, but they'll probably still have a good enough record to make the playoffs. Okay, well, now North Dakota State's in the playoffs, but their top players aren't playing, so now they have to have a pro day in the middle of a practice week. Boy, what an interesting dynamic that's going to be. And then, you know, you take into effect like, hey, okay, well, I've got to help the NFLPA Bowl put together a roster here. And it's like, how much of an impact is our decision going to have on an FCS guy who could be a fringe day 3 player, but because they got an invite to an all-star game, now they think they're a day 2 prospect. I mean, as you know, John, every player thinks they're a pro prospect, and you get an all-star game invite. Well, now, hey, it's like, hey, let me sign with an agent. Let me get my training paid for. Let me begin this process because, hey, I just got an all-star game invite. And, I'll be honest, with somebody that has that decision-making authority, I've really got to think long and hard and twice about that, because am I steering the kid in the wrong direction by sending him a message that, hey, you have this all-star game invite? Nothing's guaranteed here. Yeah, we're going to put you on the big stage, a platform where you can be seen by NFL scouts. But hey, guess what? You're not a surefire lock here. And okay, I will admit, you get a Senior Bowl invite, it's a little bit different story. 90 to 95% of those guys usually wind up getting drafted. So I just think it's a interesting dynamic. We're winding down on the hour of power, so I'll let you finish up. Any final thoughts just on anything we discussed?
No, I think the biggest things are, that you can see the inconsistency. That's the only thing that's been consistent in all this.
Lack of leadership.
And it's unbelievable that you're literally saying that. And again, I understand, and it's great for those, the service academies to say that. So service academy, you can't play your conference games, but you can play the other 2 service academies. Big Ten, we're not going to play. And the reason we're not going to play is we thought we were jumping out to be on the forefront of, we were going to say it first, and then everyone was coming behind us, and boy, we would look great. And nobody came behind us. So then we get the friends, the family, the players, the coaches, the media, everybody's killing us for not playing. We try to come up with a plan to play, figure out there's no way to probably do that in the spring. And if part 2 of COVID shows up, now we're really done. And now we could be done. And I'm also wondering, in the bigger picture, if a secondary wave of any of this comes and is bad, are these universities or conferences looking at it saying, we might have to just try to play football, because what if we can't play basketball again? What if the whole thing got shut down again, and we're knocked out of college basketball, college football, college basketball? I mean, the whole thing will shut down. It would cease to exist if you can't do that. Because if you look, the same people that are talking about doing football this way or not are the same. The hardliners are also, I think Michigan State might have been one of them, who was saying he's trying to come up with a strategy to bubble the basketball team, away from everything in order for them to play, because it's a far less number of players, staff, coaches, and other. So you look at it, and again, it makes sense. Michigan and Michigan State, their 2 their school presidents are doctor-based. Michigan for sure, Michigan State for sure. Maryland, I think, is an engineering, like NASA, type guy background, in his, in his background, of things. So you got guys who are being very precise and letter of the law to what they're reading and seeing. And if you're already looking at the possibilities that basketball is a question mark, and you're thinking about bubbling your college basketball program, and you're worried about completing a college football season as well, I think some of this just boils down to the factor of the same, even though it's at a huge level, that at a certain point, if all your bills or mine were coming due, and we said, does that mean I got to throw on a mask and risk going outside and going to work? At a certain point, you're going to make the decision that we just got to do what we got to do. And it makes me wonder, because nothing has really changed. Okay, we have better testing. All right, that's every week or month, we're going to have a little bit better testing. And now it's a little bit more affordable. And now there's a chance, but everything you're doing in order to try to play are the same things you would have done to try to play already, because teams are playing. The NFL played this weekend. You know how many people tested positive prior to the games? Zero. 1,500 plus tests? Zero. How many people in the NHL bubble have tested positive? Zero. How many but in the NBA bubble in the past, 2 months? Zero. So there's a way to do it. You just can't afford to do it in college football in that type of environment or that way. So the risk is going to be, I'm giving you daily testing, I'm giving you the maximum amount of space, and I'm giving you an opportunity to play. Everybody's going to sign up for it until or unless, like Dr. Turner has said, a kid with an underlying circumstance or a 350-pound lineman or some kid pulls an Isaiah Wilson and goes off and does what he wants to on his own time, and somebody gets really sick. And then do we have an immediate shutdown of the entire NCAA? Or is it just that one program that goes to the side and gets shut down? But I think what they figured out is there's a lot more than just money at risk. So there's money at risk, there's the health standard at risk, but some of these universities quite literally could be at risk if there is a chance that you haven't figured out college football yet. And guess what? Here comes college basketball, and it's already September, and we're quickly heading toward October. And if you can't get either or both of those two sports up and running and making money, there's going to be a lot of universities that are in massive trouble. And not just because they're not playing sports. They won't have the money to turn the lights on soon.
Shut them down. Shut them down. That's what's coming around. It's the state of football here each and every weekday. Appreciate everybody tuning in. Some great chat room conversation. Dr. Turner, don't worry. We'll tag you in on the conversations tomorrow. Appreciate the Maverick Sports Consulting gear. Make sure you check out our good friends at Maverick Sports Consulting. Of course, NFLDraftBible.com. Tomorrow night, we've got the Bob Wiley, Brian Baldinger O-Line Seminar. Friday night, Scout School. It's Special Teams Edition this Friday. By the way, we've got our Scouting the Nation article up on the NFLDraftBible.com. If you want all the risers, sliders, and surprises from the past weekend of college football, we got you covered there. Also took a deep dive into Isaiah Wilson, the anatomy of a first-round bust. We hope he gets the help that he needs. Tomorrow we'll be back, like I said, with David Turner, John Murphy, and myself. RIC in the place to be. Rick Serritella, telling it like it is when it comes to the state of football.